he starts to correct people's views of the world. Now, for several thousands of years, they've had certain views. Okay? And we see him talking about the Beatitudes first and saying how these things are what's good. And they're contrary to common thought. They're contrary to what you would think are good traits or good values. He's given a clearer picture, a better understanding. Then we also see him move into things of the law. Things that for 1,500 years or so, the Jewish people have had a certain understanding of. Okay? Now Jesus, as he says, didn't come to abolish or get rid of the law, but to fulfill it, to complete it, to give the entire picture. We got a small picture given to Moses that gives us an understanding, but not a complete picture. Okay? That's what Jesus is here to do, fulfill that, to let us understand the full meaning of these things. And we see this in the example when he talks about murder. He says, okay, you've understood murder is this thing, but let me tell you that murder really is this. Let me clarify you and tell you the entire part. Let me fulfill this law for you. He says, same thing about adultery. You've heard adultery is just this, and this is what you understood. But I'm here to clarify and fulfill that and show you the big picture of what adultery really is. And you see this theme throughout this chapter. Okay? So finally, he talks about divorce. And it's the same style. He says, it's been said, this is verse 31, it has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. And that's accurate. That's what Moses said to do in Deuteronomy. Okay? That's what their law has, and that was 1,500 years that they had that. Okay? But he clarifies that, and he tells them and expands their perspectives on this, fulfilling the law. It says, but I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, causes her to become an adulteress. And anyone who marries the divorced woman commits adultery. So what he's telling us is that you, from your understanding, you're saying that you believe that divorce is okay. But I'm telling you that it causes adultery. Okay? He says this, it causes adultery in every case, with the exception of if there was already marital unfaithfulness. So in other words, unless there was already adultery, it causes adultery. So it couldn't cause adultery if there was already adultery. So it obviously couldn't do it there. But in every other case, it causes adultery. Now, not only just one adultery. Because if I divorce my wife, it says here that I am causing her to become an adulteress. So my sin of divorce is now causing her to commit the sin of adultery. Now, it also says anyone who marries her commits adultery as well. Okay? Now, what's the purpose of seeking a divorce? Is so that I can be free from that bond, and then I can go remarry. So then when I remarry, that causes another adultery. And then I cause the woman that I remarry commit adultery as well. So we have one sin that Jesus is saying, no, you've heard of this, but I'm telling you this. When you do that, you've just now caused 5 sins, or an additional 4. And you're bringing all these people in. You are causing this when you do that. Okay? So that's just one example there from Matthew chapter 5, in the beginning of Jesus' ministry. So let's continue on. Now on top of my PowerPoint. Okay, let's continue on. Let's see if this is still what Jesus is talking about. Let's see. Check the other scriptures and see. Okay. The next spot I'd like to look at is a very small passage. So let's just get it out of the way. It's from Luke chapter 16, verse 18. Okay. And I'll read it here. I'll put it up on the screen. And chapter 17, just so you know, not talking about divorce. Chapter 9, verse 17 isn't talking about divorce. Verse 19 isn't talking about divorce. So it's just one verse spot here. So it's not really anything else to go into. But Jesus says, anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery. And the man who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Okay, pretty much the same message that we just read in Matthew 5. So we know, okay, that's exactly what he's stating. He doesn't talk about the case if the adultery's already happened, but again, he clarifies that divorce causes adultery. So that's just all I want to say about that one. That's all there is to it. But let's go now and check Mark. Mark's a little bit larger account, so I'd like us to turn there. Mark chapter 10. And so it's a little bit larger account of Jesus' teaching on the subject. And let me go ahead and read it for us. And we're going to go read in chapter 10, verses 1 through 12. So let me read that for us here if you can follow along. Jesus then left that place, and went into the region of Judea and across the Jordan. Again, crowds of people came to him, and as was his custom, he taught them. Some Pharisees came and tested him by asking, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? What did Moses command you?" He replied. They said, "Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and send her away." "It was because your hearts were hard that Moses wrote you this law," Jesus replied. "But at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let man not separate." When they were in the house again, the disciples asked Jesus about this, and he answered, "Anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another man, she commits adultery." Okay, so there's a couple things I want you to take notice in this passage that we just looked at. Okay, first of all, the Pharisees are the ones coming to Jesus to ask this question. And for those you know, I know many of us know, but just in case, the Pharisees are the religious leaders of the day. They're the ones that are following the law, a little bit legalistic on these things and making people do certain things. And they don't really care for Jesus' message. Okay, now they likely have heard maybe some of the early teaching from the Sermon on the Mount, maybe know where his stance is. But they're coming to test him. And they're coming to test him. Why are they coming to test him? Okay? They're trying to see if he's going to contradict Moses. If he's going to contradict the law. Because if they can show that he's contradicting the law, contradicting what Moses is saying, you can say that this man's not from God. His message isn't from God if he's contradicting it. Okay? Same thing if you're listening to me or another pastor and say, if his message is not from here, you know, if he's contradicting the word of God, he's going against that, I can say he's a false teacher. Okay, you can say that because it goes against the word of God. So that's what they're testing. They want him to trip up and say something that's going to go against the law. All right. Now, but Jesus knows that, and he answers here and he says, he explains the law. Well, he says, "What did Moses command you?" So he goes right to Moses. He says, "What did Moses tell you?" And they explain it. Okay. So he goes right to the law. But his answer to them is clear. He points out the reason why Moses allowed it was because their hearts were hard. Now, if you don't understand what that term means, that means you don't want to listen. You're rebellious. You are turning away from God. Okay, that's what that means. That means you don't want to listen. Okay. And his answer is clear to them. In verse 9, you see it says, "Therefore." That means that's exactly what I've been talking about. Therefore. This is the summation. This is the critical part. Therefore, what God has joined together, let man not separate. Okay, so what he's saying is that he joined them together. Remember, he's the creator. He's the one that did this. He joined them together. Do not separate them. Okay? And finally, in that passage, I want you to take a look at that there are two different conversations that are taking place in this passage. Okay? There's one conversation we just talked about, the Pharisees, and they ask him this question. Okay? The end of that conversation is verse 9. Verse 10 is a clarification when the disciples are talking to Jesus back when they get back to the house, because they heard this teaching and they're they don't know, it's going against what they've always heard too, and then they clarify with him. Okay, so that there's two different conversations that take place here. One, a direct answer to the Pharisees: do not separate what God has put together. The only reason that it was allowed by Moses is because you were not willing to listen to what God had to say to begin with. Okay? So, in verse 10 and 11, you see Jesus' explanation of the answer he already gave. Okay? He already gave the answer. Now he's explaining it and teaching it to the disciples who have come to him